killer's home wasn't a place of comfort, it was a trap. Behind ordinary walls hid unimaginable horrors. Bedrooms became cells, basements torture chambers, living rooms turned into resting places for the dead. These weren't sanctuaries, they were prisons built for pain. We're stepping inside the houses from hell on today's episode of the Infographic Show. Serial killers who turned their homes into torture chambers. The Toy Box. David Ray Parker might have had the creepiest nickname for a serial killer, the Toy Box Killer. He might not be the worst on this list, but he definitely deserves a place in the Hall of Infamy. On March 22, 1999, a hysterical 22-year-old prostitute named Cynthia Vigil was found running naked down a dusty road in New Mexico's Elephant Butte State Park. A concerned resident took her in, horrified at the sight of a padlocked dog collar around Vigil's neck. Soon, red and blue lights were flashing outside. Bruised and bloodied, Vigil trembled as she told her story. She had been the victim of a twisted couple, David Ray Parker and his girlfriend Cynthia Lee Hendy. They'd abducted her, chained her up in their trailer, and tortured her for 3 days. On the third day, left alone with Hendy, Vigil saw her chance and grabbed the keys. Hendy dived on Vigil, smashing a lamp over her head. In the struggle, Vigil managed to get a hold of an ice pick, stabbing Hendy in the neck. It wasn't fatal, but it was enough for her to escape. Barefoot, bleeding, and desperate, police quickly arrested both Ray and Hendy. Ray had grown up poor on a ranch with a strict, God-fearing mother and a violent alcoholic father. After serving in the U.S. military, he settled down in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, where he worked as a mechanic. And that's where he met Hendy, a 37-year-old woman fleeing drug charges. They had been living together for just 2 months when they met a single mom named Angie Montano. They invited her around for drinks before tying her up and assaulting her, intermittently shocking her with a cattle prod. After a few days, she convinced them to let her go. She reported it to a police officer who didn't believe her. So when the cops arrived at Ray's trailer, they'd already suspected Vigil wasn't his first victim. As they entered, they were greeted by hooks on the wall, books on torture and anatomy, and homemade tools of pain. Ray claimed that he was helping Vigil quit heroin, but the evidence told a darker story. Behind the trailer was a soundproofed semi, his toy box. Inside were hundreds of torture devices, scalpels, whips, pliers, syringes, even a machine designed to deliver shocks to women's chests. The most disturbing was an endoscopic camera Ray used to film the assaults, broadcasting them to a nearby monitor. Ray allegedly spent over $100,000 assembling this chamber of horrors. Hendy cooperated with the police, revealing that Ray had been torturing and sometimes killing women for decades. He claimed to take 4 or 5 women a year, keeping each for months before killing them. He kept a diary of the abuse, but not the burial sites. Some he said he just dumped in the local reservoir. It's estimated he killed around 60 women. None of the bodies were ever found. 3 survivors testified. Ray was sentenced to 223 years for kidnapping and torture, but died of a heart attack in 2002. No murder charges were filed. His daughter Glenda Jessie Ray helped in at least one of the abductions. She got 30 months. Hendy got 36 and was released in 2019. Another accomplice, Dennis Roy Yancey, got 30 years but was out after 11. Okay, now for some American History X. The Murder Castle. In 1894, police officers stepped into a foreboding building on 63rd Street in Chicago. Inside, nothing made sense. Hallways led to dead ends. Doors opened into brick walls. Some rooms shifted, their walls built to move. Hidden chutes dropped down into the cellar, straight into vats filled with acid. One newspaper called it an extraordinary house with appalling apparatus for wholesale murder. The owner, H.H. Holmes, came from an educated family and had graduated from the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery. But Holmes was a scammer with a dark side. He started crime young, claiming life insurance for cadavers that he had stolen from graves. In Chicago, he worked as a clerk in a drugstore on the bottom floor of a large building. With some financial trickery, he took over much of it. It was ideal for a hotel, and just in time for the World's Fair, when scores of tourists would be in town. People ripe for scamming. According to the press, residents of the area said the workmen were constantly going in and out of the building for months at a time. Holmes had them building stairs to nowhere, walls that moved, trapdoors in bedrooms, peepholes in wardrobes. And then, once they became suspicious, he would fire them without paying them and hire someone new. The media later reported that women would check into his hotel and never be seen again. He would lock them inside, the hall's a maze of confusion. Hidden bells rang whenever a door opened, alerting him to their movements. While working at a bank, Holmes crossed paths with Benjamin F. Peitzel, a con man with a knack for fraud. The two hit it off fast, forming a partnership built on deceit. By then, Holmes was married to a woman called Minnie. In letters to a friend, she gushed about meeting a handsome, wealthy, and highly intelligent man named Harry Gordon, one of Holmes's many aliases. But soon Minnie vanished, and so did her sister who went looking for her. It was all part of a scheme dreamed up by Holmes and Peitzel to get their hands on Minnie's property in Texas. Holmes then asked Peitzel to agree to a new scam. Peitzel would pose as an inventor who tragically blew himself up in a lab accident in Philadelphia. Holmes would swap in a stolen cadaver, stage the explosion, and together they would cash in on a hefty life insurance payout. Instead, Holmes murdered Peitzel, having already taken out a life insurance policy in Peitzel's name. Holmes then showed up at Mrs. Peitzel's door. He said her husband was off on urgent business in London, and to help ease her burden, he generously offered to care for 3 of her 5 children. None of them were ever seen alive again. Holmes was finally tracked down and arrested in Boston, not for murder, but for horse theft. But the arrest was just the beginning. As the authorities began digging, suspicion mounted. Their attention turned to Holmes's home in Chicago, the so-called Castle. Inside, the investigators uncovered disturbing evidence, but nothing definitive. With nothing else to go on, Holmes was charged with the murder of Benjamin Peitzel. It's still not known how many people died in his house of horrors. He claimed 27 murders in total, but police could only confirm 9, although rumors talked about 200. It's hard to know since his life is steeped in myth along with the brutal truth. On May 7, 1896, he was hanged. Just before the noose slipped over his head, he asked if he could be buried in concrete. He was worried that someone might steal and sell his organs. The next 2 houses of horror we can confidently say are the very worst in history. Cabin in the Woods. In 1999, the world's media focused on a chilling case that had taken 14 years to unravel. A U.S. judge had just sentenced Charles Ng to death for the murders of 11 people at a remote California cabin. Back in the 80s, Ng was staying in a cabin located in the Sierra Nevada foothills, but he wasn't alone. He was with a stocky, bearded man called Leonard Lake. Born in 1945, Lake was the kind of boy that people would look back on and say, "We should have seen it coming." He fixated on images of naked women and developed a disturbing fascination with cruelty. He would torment animals for tormented pleasure. After a tour in Vietnam, the military medically discharged Lake after diagnosing him with schizoid personality disorder. To the people who knew him in the hippie-infested Haight-Ashbury area of San Francisco, he was a survivalist type and a sex freak. He attempted to live a normal life for a while and got married, but his wife took off after finding out that he had been starring in porn movies, and that was around the time that he went off into the boondocks, building himself a bunker. In the early 80s, he met the 20-year-old Ng, who had just come out of prison on weapons charges. Ng, desperate for a father figure, looked up to Lake, who had been around the block. But it wasn't until 1984, after both had done time on weapons charges, that Lake introduced Ng to a place out in the woods that he called his dungeon. In June 1985, Southern San Francisco police received a call about a shoplifting incident. A young Asian man had just stolen a $75 Vice from a local hardware store, stuffing it into the trunk of a parked 1980 Honda Prelude before slipping away. The car was still there when the officers arrived, and sitting in the front seat was a heavy-set man with a thick beard. When they popped the trunk, they found more than just the Vice. Inside was a .22 caliber revolver fitted with a silencer, along with several rounds of ammunition. The driver handed over an ID. The name read Robin Scott Stapley, but the man didn't resemble the photo. Officers ran the license plate, and it didn't belong to the Honda Prelude at all. It was registered to a Buick owned by someone named Lonnie Bond. Then they checked the car's VIN number, and that's when things got serious. The Prelude was registered to Paul Cosner, a man who had been missing for over 7 months. The bearded passenger didn't resist. Back down at the jailhouse, he asked an officer for a glass of water. Moments later, he was down on the floor gurgling cyanide froth around his soon-to-be blue lips. Just a few hours later, Larry Lake was dead. Cops soon discovered he had a rap sheet for stealing and weapons. They also knew that he had a thing for pornography. They saw that he'd been married twice, the second wife getting fired as a teacher's assistant and then getting arrested for showing her high school kids how to make bombs. Investigators headed to Lake's bunker out in the woods, and that was where they came across his stash of weapons, his video equipment, and the many gruesome notebooks that he had filled with notes about murder and death. Then something started to click. People had gone missing around Lake. His brother, Donald, had vanished in thin air. It turned out that Lake hadn't much liked his sibling, once telling their mom that Donald was better off dead. And the video equipment in the bunker, some of it expensive, turned out to have been stolen from a man named Harvey Dubbs, who was also now AWOL, as was his wife and their baby. As for Lake's video collection, well, it was pure real-life horror. Harvey Dubbs' wife, 33-year-old Debbie, was in one of the videos. The media didn't state exactly what she'd endured, but they said there was no way she could have survived it. The police were disgusted. They found a VHS tape labeled M Ladies. It showed Lake and Eng threatening their victims, telling them to do what they asked or they would die. One of the rooms was used as a torture chamber where there were various tools and chains. Another room was soundproofed, and it contained a bed. On the wall was a long list of instructions for the victims to read about how they should interact with their master. Breaking these rules, the list warned, was grounds for punishment. Police searched the property further. Outside, they found women's belongings and over 40 pounds of bone fragments. But Leonard Lake was already dead. What they needed now was the man behind the stolen vice, Charles Eng. Eng had headed north to Canada, but he was later arrested after shoplifting and shooting a security guard. But getting him back into the U.S. proved difficult. Canada opposed to the death penalty and refused to extradite him. It took 6 long years of legal wrangling before Eng was finally returned to the U.S. In Lake's notebooks, he'd written that Eng wasn't at first excited about the prospect of abduction, torture, and murder, but the videos clearly showed Eng was in on some of those murders. At the trial, Eng had a tantrum, screaming so much that he had to wear a stun belt. His lawyers would argue that he had just followed the orders of Lake, a man that they claimed had total control over Eng. It's true that one of Lake's diaries said that Eng was very hesitant to get involved with his plan. And it is true that Lake killed so many people without Eng at his side. But Eng was definitely running on his own steam in some of those tortures and murders. He'd even been seen at the Dubbs' house. After 14 years and $20 million spent on the case, prosecutors presented the evidence. It took a jury 15 hours over 3 days to find Eng guilty of murdering all but one of 12 victims, after which he was sentenced to death. He is still alive, a resident at California Medical Facility. The state hasn't executed anyone since 2006, and in 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom issued a moratorium halting all executions. And now we have saved the worst for last. Even telling this story is traumatic, never mind actually being there. The House of Horrors. After a traumatic childhood marked by abuse and strict controlling parents, Fred West's life took a darker turn at just 17 years old. A serious head injury left those around him saying that he was never the same afterward. But the real warning signs came later, when he was accused by his own sister of sexual abuse. It was the start of a chilling descent into violence. Meanwhile, Rose Letts grew up among violence, deviancy, and a mentally ill mother and father. Her mother was so depressed that she was given electroconvulsive therapy when she was pregnant with Rose. During her childhood, Rose suffered at the hands of a paranoid schizophrenic father, whose brand of child-rearing was nothing short of monstrous. When Rose hit her teens, the perversions that she'd been subjected to seemed to have already rubbed off on her. So when 27-year-old Fred flirted with Rose for the first time at a bus stop when she was a teenager, she was already used to predatory men. She wasn't impressed with Fred at first, a scruffy and evidently pretty stupid man, but soon the two embodied what would perhaps become the most disturbing couple in modern history. Fred might have thought that he had caught Rose in his web, but the truth was, she had also caught him. Rose's parents tried to stop the relationship, and for a while the local authorities put her in a home for troubled kids, but she was soon out and back into the arms of her beloved Fred. In 1970, they separated again. Fred got a 50-pound fine and 3 months in prison for stealing car tires and taking a car tax disc from another car and putting it on his. But by this time, he'd already had 2 kids, so Rose was forced to take care of them while Fred served his time. His children, Anne-Marie and Charmaine, were from his first wife, Rena, a Scottish woman. Fred later strangled Rena in the back of his Ford, dismembered her, and buried her in a field. While living in Scotland during their relationship, they had taken in a troubled young woman named Annie McFall. 2 years later, Fred was living with McFall. She was pregnant with his child when she likely became his next victim. Her dismembered remains were later discovered in a cornfield, showing signs that she had been tied up and stabbed to death. So Fred had killed 2 women and had 2 children to care for. He put them in care, but got them back, and later he met Rose. The eldest daughter, Charmaine, wasn't biologically his. Her father was a Pakistani man. Being mixed race with a different skin tone and no blood connection to Fred likely made her a target for Rose, who was particularly cruel toward her. That cruelty only worsened when Fred went to prison and left Charmaine in Rose's care. As for Anne-Marie, years later she kinda summed up her horrifying childhood in a few words: "I can still taste the fear." While Fred was away, Rose kept the 2 girls locked in a room. Their toilet was a bucket that Rose liked to kick over for fun. Meanwhile, she sent Fred letters professing her love and adoration for him. His letters would be the same. They absolutely worshipped each other. The problem for the kids was they didn't worship them. One day, with Fred still behind bars, Anne-Marie came home to the flat and Rose told her that her sister Charmaine was gone. Anne-Marie had seen with her own eyes what Rose had done to Charmaine when she was around. Rose's punishments verged on sadism, but she didn't suspect murder. How could she? It was their mom. The family would eventually live at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, and that's where they would bring up 9 children together, their 10th already dead. On the 3rd floor of the house, Fred built a seedy-looking bar. Just next to it was a room with silk sheets on the bed and tacky sex paraphernalia scattered around. This was Rose's space, where she took her male clients under the name Mandy. Fred had installed a peephole and even fitted in a camera. He didn't just tolerate her work, it was a business they both seemed to take a lot of pleasure from. Rose was a sex maniac and Fred enjoyed watching. The house often had lodgers, both male and female. Rose would seduce the willing ones into her room, sometimes persuading them to try things that left them shocked or uneasy. Only Rose had the key to that room, which she kept around her neck. For the lodgers who declined her advances, what happened in that room remained a mystery. Some actually liked the family, but others knew strange things were happening in that house. Despite Fred being a predatory degenerate and Rose a violent sadist with a volatile temper, there were home videos, scenes of apparent happiness, the family cycling down country paths, playing games, laughing together. Rose made cakes and was known for putting on a perfect Christmas dinner. There were moments of warmth, but things could turn in an instant, and what Fred and Rose told the kids was normal was absolutely abnormal. In 1993, Fred and Rose were placed under arrest, accused of the neglect and the abuse of their children. That was all the police officially had at that point, but they already knew one of the West children had gone missing. The remaining 5 at the house were quietly moved into foster care, and the eldest had already moved out. Over the years, the Wests had taken in countless lodgers, many of whom sensed something was off in that house. Some of those lodgers never left. They were young people that Fred had somehow persuaded to move in with him and Rose. Then, in 1994, police uncovered human remains buried in the garden. Then, they found more and more. Fred denied everything at first and was not exactly cooperative, but eventually he began to talk. He admitted to burying the bodies under the patio and in the cellar. His method was strangulation, followed by dismemberment and burial. Fred was not a smart man. During one interview, he slipped up by saying 2 bodies before correcting himself and saying it was just 1, not 2. At the time, Rose denied knowing anything about the murders. She was much smarter than Fred and way more manipulative. Police bugged the house where she stayed, and Rose put on a performance shouting about how terrible this all was, not letting on that she was the devil's accomplice. In several interviews, Fred insisted again and again that Rose had nothing to do with it. He said that she was a good mother, a loving wife, nothing like him. He was lying through his crooked teeth. Many of the lodgers and survivors recalled Rose being the one in control. The children said that she wore the pants in the relationship. Fred was stronger and more prone to outbursts, but Rose had a sadistic streak. The truth is, they were both monstrously cruel. Fred may have done the hands-on dirty work, but Rose was colder, more calculating. She wanted victims, and Fred delivered. She wanted a torture chamber, and Fred built one for her in the cellar. He built a play area there too, for the kids. What Fred and Rose did to their victims down there is not 100% certain, but we do know they tied people and yanked them up on a pulley. We do know that the victims had tape wrapped over their mouths, sometimes with tubes in their nostrils, so their beating wasn't interrupted. Once suspended, the couple got to work with a variety of tools. The victims suffered greatly before they died. Fred and Rose West were organized sadists who hunted or lured unsuspecting victims back to their home. Often these victims were vulnerable young people, many of them runaways. 2 of their victims were their own children, Charmaine and later Heather, who was a defiant teenager and may have threatened to tell the police what was really happening inside Cromwell Street. What the reality was has never been fully exposed. Some victims, like 21-year-old Lucy Partington, were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lucy may have accepted a ride from the Wests, perhaps reassured by the presence of a woman and a child in the car, and that was the last time that she had been seen alive. Her remains were identified when the digging started. The other children in the house didn't realize their parents were serial killers, but there was a chilling joke that if you were naughty, you would end up under the patio like Heather, and that, as it turned out, was no empty threat. Fred never made it to trial. He died in his jail cell, taking what many call the easy way out. Rose, on the other hand, is still serving a whole life sentence. She keeps to herself, reportedly enjoys knitting and cooking. Most other women in the prison refuse to speak to her. She will never leave. These killer houses of horrors are disturbing enough, but if you really want to lose sleep, watch The Werewolf, World's Worst Serial Killer, and see how one man unleashed a reign of terror like no other. Or click on this video instead.